It was September 11, 2001. Heather "Lucky" Penney was chosen for a high-stakes mission that could have changed the course of American history.
Completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed. It folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
She risked her life for her country without doubt or hesitation. Penney was among the first wave of America's female fighter pilots and is best known for defending American skies during the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
I really don't see myself as a hero.
Penney's mission was to intercept Flight 93, then believed to be possibly heading to another target like the U.S. Capitol, but now known as the hijacked plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. What she didn't know at the time was that her father, a United Airlines pilot, could have been flying that very plane. When asked if she'd do it all over again, she answers,
Absolutely, even with daughters, even with my life now.
This is Heather Penney, and this is her story.
Aviation has always been in my blood. As a matter of fact, I'm a third-generation pilot.
Her father, John Penney, was a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel who'd flown in Vietnam and later became a commercial pilot for United Airlines. His determined daughter got her pilot's license at 18. But it wasn't until Penney went to college in 1992 that she learned a jarring fact. Women weren't allowed to be fighter pilots. Then, in 1993, Congress opened combat aviation to women.
I didn't learn about this change in the law that allowed me to enter the cockpit until I was in graduate school.
In 1996, Penney discovered that she could indeed follow in her father's footsteps. Her dream could finally happen. She applied and was hired to the D.C. Air National Guard. 2 years later, Penney began her career when she was commissioned as an Air Force officer. She began undergraduate pilot training in Texas and earned her clever aviation nickname.
Lucky is my call sign. Realistically, it's a play off of my last name, Lucky Penney. But all call signs, and by the way, you don't get to pick yours, it's given to you by your fighter squadron after you become combat mission ready.
3 years after Penney stepped into the cockpit, the 9/11 terror attacks happened.
We all knew that this was a one-way mission. If we were successful, we wouldn't be coming back.
No one knew of Penney's story until the 10th anniversary of the attacks in 2011.
I didn't tell my story because I didn't think it was worth telling.
She was a rookie pilot in the fall of 2001. The 121st Fighter Squadron of the D.C. Air National Guard had never had a female F-16 fighter pilot before.
Flying the F-16 is a lot like playing chess at 500 knots and 9 Gs. It's incredibly physically demanding and very intellectual.
Penney had just completed 2 weeks of air combat training.
What I remember the most about that morning was how clear blue the skies were. They were just utterly crystalline.
As she sat at a meeting in D.C. with her colleagues, someone said,
An aircraft flew into the World Trade Center.
Now, by the entire ABC network, Good Morning America was in progress in the East Coast and the Midwest, but we're joined by the entire network just to show you some pictures.
At first, like much of the world, they assumed it was a tragic accident when the plane flew into the first tower. Then, the scene in downtown Manhattan became clear.
It wasn't until he came back the second time and said, a second aircraft flew into the second World Trade Center. It was on purpose.
After the second plane hit the second tower, it was war. At the time in Washington, D.C., there were no missiles in place to defend the Capitol. There were no armed aircraft standing by. No system for something like this, period.
So the Secret Service calls us and gives us that authorization to launch. Our director of operations at the time, he was a major, Mark Sasseville, looked at me and said, Lucky, you're with me.
Penney and Major Mark Sasseville would fly together in 2 separate planes. It was not just a pact, it was potentially a fatal mission.
Sass and I were prepared to sacrifice our lives to protect our nation. We had no missiles, no armament on board. And so we knew that if we were able to find this airliner, that we would have to crash our jets into the airliner to prevent it from getting to the United States Capitol.
In the tense and confusing moments after the New York and Pentagon attacks, their mission was to stop Flight 93 from hitting another location. Remember, her dad might have been in that cockpit.
It never occurred to me that my dad, who was a pilot for United at the time, could have been airborne on that day. He had been flying routes up and down the East Coast. My mother figured it out weeks afterwards that actually could have been him in the cockpit. As for me, that thought never crossed my mind. And if it had, it wouldn't have changed it.
Penney accepted her fate and the fate of those on board. All their lives would have to be sacrificed for the possibility of saving others. But did it have to be that way? Could she eject herself in time?
The thought occurred to me really briefly that maybe I could point my jet at the tail and just before impact eject. But then I quickly brushed that out of my mind because what if I ejected and I missed? I could be coming down on my parachute and watch my jet merrily continue to fly off and the airliner continue to fly off. So I quickly brushed the notion out of my mind.
When they took off, they did not have ammunition. They didn't have missiles. Nothing to stop the hijacked plane. All they had were their own planes to sacrifice. Penney and Sasseville were in touch with air traffic control, flying toward the direction of the missing plane. But when they didn't find anything about 100 miles out, they turned back to set up combat air patrol over D.C.
A combat air patrol is essentially where fighters fly in an orbit over a location to protect that location.
As luck would have it for Heather Lucky Penney, she would not have to carry out that mission. The heroic passengers and crew of United Airlines Flight 93 fought the terrorists to regain control, plowing into a field in Pennsylvania.
United Flight 93 heading towards Washington, but the drama unfolding because the passengers on that flight are going to bring it down. They bring it down to Shanksville.
I mean, the true heroes, if you think about it, are the passengers on Flight 93 and the first responders who rushed into the buildings, not just stood outside, or the people who were in the buildings who helped each other, or even the workers who cleaned up Ground Zero knowing that that work would eventually kill them, but doing it anyways, because our nation needed the healing.
None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
In the weeks and the months that followed, I did what everyone else in my squadron did, which was fly combat air patrols 24/7. I had the midnight to 4 a.m. shift. I didn't really feel like I needed to process anything because I didn't feel like what I did was special or unique.
Penney went on to have an extraordinary career. She flew 2 combat tours in Iraq and eventually took a job at Lockheed Martin, where she worked to communicate between engineers, programs, and Air Force customers. Today, she's a senior fellow at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies and works on defense policy research and analysis. She's also mom to 2 girls.
It'd be so awesome if my daughters were fighter pilots. You know, keep the family business going. The most important thing that I wish for my daughters, and just like my mother did for me, that they can be anything that they dream of, that they want to be.
And, of course, she still loves to fly.
Airplanes do have a soul, and their story is our story. We all have that capacity, but we don't have to wait for history. That we can all do something that changes somebody else's life today. And it might be a minor kindness. It might be just having a little bit extra courage to do the right thing. Or overcoming our own fears, again, to do that thing that needs to be done.
Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff here. So go on, click the subscribe button right over here to get more of awesome videos and content from GMA every day, anytime. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the morning on GMA.